What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to this week's episode of High Floor Football. We've been gone for, about a week and a half, but we're back now. I had to take some time off to get everything right with our schedules because, we're both busy guys out here, but we are back. As always, I am your host, Sam Wagman, and with me every week, as he is, the man, the myth, the legend, JR himself. What's going on, buddy? How you doing?
What's up, Sam? Good to be back. I'm happy to finish our buys series, I guess, short series. We're just doing running backs and quarterbacks. Now we're doing the wide receivers and the tight ends, the pass catchers. So, yeah, I'm excited to get back and go through some of these. I think we're going to go through kind of the same way that we did the running backs, quarterbacks. I know you have a couple guys on the maybe a little bit higher side. I have some guys on the little bit deeper side. So we're kind of going to cover a wide range of guys. 6 buys at wide receiver and 4 at tight end. So some info to go back and send some dynasty trades. It's dynasty trade season, the best time. Never ends.
Hell yeah. I mean, there's not a better time than, when it's June and everything else is kind of dead. We get a chance to kind of refocus after the draft and look at our dynasty team, see how things changed. Picks start to get devalued again. So things become a little bit easier to move along trade wise since the draft is now over. So it's good to get back to that time and then to reassess. And, we got a few weeks left of what we term dynasty season here in the space before everyone dives headfirst into redraft season, which will come at the end of this month. Hopefully, if Jay lets it be finally.
Dynasty season never ends is the secret of dynasty.
Yeah,
it's like Fight Club. You never talk about Fight Club dynasty season. It never ends. You never talk about it ending.
Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, it is kind of that, but there's got to be a time. It's like the seasons. We had dynasty season, and it runs from February until June or July, and then we have best ball season that lasts for like a month and a half till the start of redraft season in August, and then that's when everything gets pulled into that. So I mean, I like this time frame. It's slow for sure content wise, but there's so many trades to be made because people are just starting to get back to their fantasy lineups now that rookie drafts have started, and they're looking for people that they can trade for. They're looking for ways to exploit their league mates, all of that fun stuff. And we just did a dynasty rookie mock a couple weeks ago, and that was great. Had some great results come out of that. And then last week we went and did our quarterback and running back trade targets for dynasty. And now we are back with wide receivers and tight ends. Yeah. So let's go ahead. Let's dive right into it. You want to go first? What do you got first for us?
I've got someone first who, doesn't get a lot of love in the fantasy community anymore, because I think a little bit of my explanation that I'll explain with this is, because we saw so much success early on that, how it's happened these past couple of years, how his career how his career trajectory has been these past couple of years has been, a little bit of a disappointment compared to what we saw early on. So my first one is Juju Smith-Schuster, and let me preface it by saying, we are using the Fantasy Pros ECR, the expert consensus rankings, because ADP is a little wonky for Dynasty around this time of year with the different startups and rookie drafts and all that kind of stuff going on. So we are using Fantasy Pros ECR if you want to reference where any of these guys are. Juju Smith-Schuster is wide receiver 40 right now. Right around Allen Robinson, Sky Moore, Gabriel Davis, Brandon Cooks, Brandon Ayuk, Michael Thomas. That's kind of the range that he's in, with a couple of guys behind him like Chase Claypool, Tyler Lockett, Hunter Renfrow. Juju is, like I said, not getting a lot of love in the dynasty community for good reason. He didn't even play a lot last year. The other years have been a little bit disappointing. But you look back to 2018, I mean, he got 166 targets, 111 receptions, 1,400 yards, and 7 touchdowns. And here's the thing. Juju, 2 out of the last 4 years, has missed a decent amount of time. The 2 years where he played 16 games, he had 128 targets and 166 targets and 111 catches and 97 catches, which is pretty great for your wide receiver. If he's getting around 90 plus to 100 catches. That's quality and not under 7 touchdowns. So he had 7 in 2018, 9 in 2020. Now you go to the 2 years where he missed time. 2019 he only played 12 games. 2021 he played 5 games. So those are kind of throwaway seasons, and I think that we all got disappointed because either after 2018 you drafted Juju really high, hoping that he was going to continue that, gets hurt in 2019, comes back in 2020, gives you a little bit but not much yardage, only 831 yards on the 97 catches, which isn't great. But 2021 comes around, we're kind of looking to buy back in, and only plays 5 games. So he flirted with Kansas City last year. Now he finally finds himself in Kansas City. And I don't think there's any way to look at it as not an upgrade. So he's still being priced at the wide receiver 40, like I said. So, back end wide receiver 3, middle of the range wide receiver 3. And I kind of find it hard to believe that there's not upside for more, with Patrick Mahomes. He only signed a 1-year deal, so there is a little bit of uncertainty with the contract. But I kind of think, he's still a young player. He's 25. He's maybe playing to get that bigger contract, trying to play his way into the bigger contract so he doesn't necessarily take a discount based on these injury-riddled seasons he's had. Kansas City added Sky Moore, and, to a point Sam and I were talking about before the show, which I'm in full agreement with, is Juju has not really worked great without a true number one guy around him. When he was there with Antonio Brown, Juju was great playing off of Antonio Brown. I think there's some skepticism of when Juju first got there and Tyreek Hill was there with Travis Kelsey, we were all pretty excited. Juju's role was almost boxed into being that slot guy, that short area guy, bunch of receptions, good for PPR. Tyreek Hill leaves. They bring in Marquez Valdes-Scantling to kind of be that field stretcher. Sky Moore, we'll see what he gets used at. But, Travis Kelsey wakes up out of bed with, 1,200 yards every single year. He is a wide receiver 1 in whatever sense you want to put it. So he's going to be garnering a lot of the attention. And I think that leaves a lot of room for Juju to really improve on what we've seen in the past couple of years. So I'm not going to say he can get back to the 2018 output that he, 100-plus catches and 1,400 yards. But I think that it's going to be, a significant upgrade from where he's getting drafted at wide receiver 40. And this is, like we talked about a little bit before, this is dynasty trade season. And part of that, I think, is being able to get in on things like this where everything's uncertain. We don't know how these guys are going to turn out in 2022. So you're having to bet on different things. I think betting on Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs and, kind of with them trying to almost search for what they're going to do without Tyreek Hill there, which we haven't seen in a long time, I think it's a great spot for Juju. So what are your thoughts on him? I mean, again, not pitching for him to be a top 10 guy, but going as wide receiver 40 seems a little bit deep.
Yeah, I think 40 is definitely a little bit too high for what we know Juju can do. And look, a huge part, for me at least, I've always played on whether I would approach Juju or not as to who is around him, who can he play off of. And, you're right. Travis Kelsey being there makes a huge difference because we just haven't seen Juju in a place where he can reliably feed off of other coverage being drawn to superior receivers. But he'll have that to a point in Kansas City. My only problem is that he may still get the team's number 1 cornerback on him because teams don't put cornerbacks on Travis Kelsey. The only tight end in the league that's getting a cornerback put on him is Kyle Pitts because he routinely lines up out wide and he needed a ton of bracket coverage from cornerbacks and linebackers last year. But for every other tight end in the league, you're still going to most of the time have a linebacker attached to them, in the underneath in the middle of the field. Travis Kelsey's no different. I mean, Travis Kelsey is a typical NFL tight end, receiving tight end in today's game. He plays in the slot and he runs underneath routes and he runs routes, out wide, but he doesn't split out wide that much. So I don't know how much time he'll spend having a corner on him, which still makes me think we may see some teams' top cornerback attention directed at Juju. That alone is going to hamper his upside for me. But I do think in Dynasty, we're just thinking about this year. I think in Dynasty, as soon as next year, the Chiefs may go back to the wide receiver well again in what could be a stacked wide receiver class once again, like we have seen the last several years.
Sure.
Sky Moore is not going to be the guy that pulls a top cornerback, at least not right away. Sky Moore could turn out to be Antonio Brown, and as soon as the second season moved to playing on the outside, despite being a little bit undersized at 5'10", 190. But right now, he's probably going to start in the slot. And again, he's going to have the team slot cornerback on him. Juju's going to be all by himself out wide with MVS there. And again, MVS not good enough to draw number one coverage away. So I do have a little bit of worries for Juju. I think wide receiver 40 is too high. I think he should be more in that 32 to 35 range. But I don't know if I'm going to go crazy and say that he's way out of ADP position where he is right now.
No, I don't necessarily disagree with that. And just quick counterpoints to the things that you brought up, because they're good points, is I do view that he's going to play a little bit more in the slot more often than more often than he might have been forced to. Well, actually, I mean, he played in the slot a decent amount in Pittsburgh too, but I expect him to be in the slot because I'm a little bewildered by the Marquez Valdes-Scantling signing based on the amount of money, but I think the role seems pretty clear. I mean, what you just had Tyreek Hill doing, although Tyreek Hill can kind of do everything, but Marquez Valdes-Scantling is going to open up the underneath part of the field. I mean, you have to cover him deep, regardless if he's going to catch it or not is more of the issue, but he is a big deep threat. So I'm more so expecting Marquez Valdes-Scantling on the outside, Sky Moore on the outside more often than not, and Juju working the inside with Travis Kelsey. And I think the Chiefs saw a little bit more last year that they aren't going to be able to just be this big play offense all the time. They're going to have to find ways to move the ball. That happened throughout last season. And to your other point, which, a good point, we are talking about Dynasty, so not just this next season. Juju is just deceptively so young, man. He came in the league so young. He's
only 25, right?
He's entering his sixth season. He's 25 years old, which is, that's why I kind of think that Juju has been willing to take these smaller contracts. He's still 25. He, does the TikTok dances, all the endorsements. So I think Juju has money coming in from, the other things. Juju's a great personality. So I think that he's more worried about getting the big contract when he actually does what he thinks he can do on the field. So I'm hoping that happens this year. And either way, I mean, I think he's a good target that's not too expensive, that has the upside to clearly, because we've seen it, produce at an elite level, regardless if that's going to happen this year or not. I think he's a good buy. So
yeah, I think no matter what, he's in the right place for him to improve his dynasty value. This could I think it's definitely fair for both of us to say this is the lowest we're going to see Juju's dynasty value for a pretty long time. I think there's no way it doesn't go up somewhat with him landing in Kansas City. Just seeing what that offense can do. So
I agree.
Yeah, we'll go from there. So I think we're both kind of, you're in, I'm there, I'm on the doorstep. So we'll go from there into my top guy, and my top dynasty buy is Rashad Bateman, who's going off the board at wide receiver 22. Now we all know Marquise Brown is no longer in Baltimore. Mark Andrews is there. Bateman's there, and not much else. Look, the Lamar contract situation is interesting, before I get into this, because he's essentially waiting. The team is saying that he's taking his time, and that when he's ready to sign the deal, they're ready to sign the deal. But this could also be them kind of playing it safe, and maybe Lamar will take the Kirk Cousins route on a year-to-year basis to see whether he can stay healthy, because we all know that his style of play is not the safest thing. So, that's something that you need to factor in when trying to price Rashad Bateman appropriately. But I do think where he's going right now at wide receiver 22 in the ECR is just a tad too low, given what we know from the last few seasons. Now, it's definitely true that Mark Andrews stepped up his output dramatically last season, but when Lamar went down, he almost doubled his fantasy points per game during that stretch. He was getting so many more targets versus when Lamar was the quarterback versus when Tyler Huntley was the quarterback. So it's a little bit skewed. We have to assume that he's not going to repeat, 100 catches, 100 or 1,300 yards and 10 plus touchdowns like that. That's just not happening again. But I also don't think he's going to go back to his normal 700 to 800 yards per season and 6 or 7 touchdowns. I think it's somewhere that we meet in the middle there. So I do think Mark Andrews is the receiver to target in this offense. He's probably going to keep his 28 to 29% target share that he had last season. But the real question is, who takes over Hollywood Brown's 26.7% target share from last season? And the answer to that is Rashad Bateman. Now, look, he's got the draft capital. He was drafted 27th overall. He's got the measurables. His prospect, profile is great. 4.440. He's got everything he needs to. He's a very good route runner. Probably one of the better route runners in last year's draft, behind only our boy Devontae Smith. But he didn't really get a chance to strut his stuff because the way the Ravens run their offense, it really only caters to one wide receiver and, the tight end cycling through. So I like Rashad Bateman this year to come off and put up very solid numbers because, look, he's gonna step into this target share that Hollywood leaves behind. And while it may not be 27% like his was, it's probably going to be 23, 24%. And he only put up 500 yards last season. And that's playing some weeks he was only playing 30 to 40% of the snap share. Hollywood was playing 90% of the snap share. Bateman's numbers double here. His opportunity is going to go way up. And look, he's going to be used in the red zone a little bit more. He's going to be used downfield. He'll be used in crossers and deep seams. Everything is looking up for him. And the Ravens clearly believe in him if they're going to trade Hollywood, who was their first round pick a few years ago. And they traded him. And now the stage is set for Bateman to take over because it really makes sense if the Ravens stay pass heavy that Bateman could put up a top 15 season.
Yeah, and I love Rashad Bateman too, so I don't have much argument there. The only thing I would say is I do think he's relatively fairly priced in Dynasty based on the ECR, similar to what you were saying about Juju. I think that what we've seen from Rashad Bateman so far, I don't know that he necessarily belongs much higher. That being said, I think some of the people that are ahead of him in Fantasy Pros ECR, I would not be taking ahead of Rashad Bateman. So, we can say both Jets receivers. I would have Rashad Bateman over Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore. So I would take Rashad Bateman over Treylon Burks. So there are those guys where I think that, we get excited. It's May. The draft, relatively just happened. We all are hyped up by these rookies. And this might sound like a hot take to people. I don't know. Maybe not. But, Rashad Bateman, if he came out in this class, would have been the one, if not the two, in terms of wide receivers, in my opinion. You were talking about a class that didn't have Jamar Chase, didn't have Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith for Rashad Bateman to compete with, and I was taking Rashad Bateman ahead of Elijah Moore, 7 days a week. So I think Rashad Bateman belongs there. I think that, clearly what you said, great point. They gave up Marquise Brown, pretty casually, and apparently he wanted to leave. He requested the trade. But you don't do that if you're not, you don't just honor anybody's trade request necessarily for a young player like that if you're not confident in who's going to take over that spot. I think Rashad Bateman is super talented. I kind of think that we got away from that because of last year and because of how sour people were when he landed in Baltimore instead of, some other landing spots. But Hollywood Brown was a wide receiver too last year, as I'm sure you touched on, and everybody kind of knows that. Hollywood Brown was a good fantasy asset last year, and he's a great player. I don't think he's as good of a player as Rashad Bateman overall. I think Rashad Bateman is able to do more things. I actually don't love, player comps all the time. I know we all, don't, and they all come with a grain of salt. Rashad Bateman, though, really did remind me of Keenan Allen, and I think it really was like a good comp. And Keenan Allen has dealt with that his whole career, where people, he's really good. Keenan Allen's really good, but he was never, viewed as one of the top guys. It was always like, okay, well, he's really good, but he's not this guy. He's not Devontae Adams. He's not this and that. He kind of rolls out of bed with 100 catches every year, Keenan Allen is really, really good. And whenever you ask any of the players around the NFL, you ask Devontae Adams, who does he watch? Keenan Allen is on every single one of those lists because he's just a really good player. I think Rashad Bateman is that too. And we were kind of, deprived of that last year based on what you said, the quarterback situation, his usage, coming in as a rookie into that sort of run heavy offense that was a little confused. The Ravens dealt with a lot of, pardon my French, I won't say anything. They dealt with a lot of blank last year because of all those injuries, man.
Dobbins, then Edwards, then Tyson Williams,
Ronnie Stanley,
Devontae Freeman.
Everybody, man. The Ravens dealt with so much that they were just trying to field a team. And they did not necessarily get to bring along these guys the way that they will hopefully be brought along this year. So I'm pretty excited about Rashad Bateman, man. And you know that I wasn't going to, argue that at all. I love him. I love having him on the Dynasty teams that I have him on. And I think that he's undervalued without being necessarily like, he's not hated on. People aren't like, oh, I don't want Rashad Bateman. But at the same time, it's like, people don't come to your team and they're like, I'm coming for Rashad Bateman because there are things to be uncertain about in the Ravens offense. That being said, the guys that are going ahead of him based on the fantasy ECR, the guys being ranked ahead of him, I think it's a little premature. Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, Treylon Burks. I would take Rashad Bateman over all three. So there's my take on it. Moving to the next guy on my list, Jacoby Myers, who I feel like we've been at this for a while. Last year he was my buy on like pretty much every Dynasty show that Ben and I did for 14 personnel. It was always Jacoby Myers and Kendrick Bourne. I was pretty excited about Kendrick Bourne too, and I got them on a lot of fantasy teams. And in Dynasty, when you have these deeper rosters, it matters, man. And you have a Jacoby Myers or a Kendrick Bourne that you could slot in each week. Yet they're not world beaters, they're not wide receiver ones, but they do produce. Jacoby Myers got 126 targets last year, 83 receptions, little under 900 yards, and the bugaboo is only 2 touchdowns. That is the Jacoby Myers.
Hey, issue. They're the first 2 touchdowns of his career.
I guess that's
a big deal.
No, you're absolutely right. There's no reason to complain about them because they were 100% better than he was the year before in that category. But even as somebody who rostered Jacoby Myers on a lot of teams throughout this, late season to off season, I was pretty confident the Patriots were going to add more at wide receiver. I was like, for sure. Mac Jones, I was thinking, is definitely going to be more of a buy than he was because the Patriots are going to load up this offense for him. They didn't. They brought in Devontae Parker, who, we'll see what happens. But I don't think he cuts into Jacoby Myers' role at all. I think they're different sort of players. Devontae's going to be on the outside. I think Jacoby Myers is going to be in the slot a lot. And the Patriots like him. I think they just like to use Jacoby Myers. He is forever, for almost 3 years now, carved out a role in New England. So he's going to be entering his 4th season, coming off his best year, 126 targets. Give me another 126 targets for Jacoby Myers from Mac Jones, and we'll see what happens. He wasn't, again, not elite. I'm talking about a wide receiver 60. So he's being ranked as the 60th wide receiver. This isn't, somebody who's going to come and necessarily be a starter on your dynasty teams. If you're trying to compete, I hope Jacoby Myers isn't one of your starting receivers. But having Jacoby Myers on your bench, I think is really good. And I've got him this offseason in trades as, I always like to talk about this on our show and with dynasty trades, as I'm a big trader, is, whatever you can get guys that you like as add-ins in trades where they're not the focal point and you can be like, oh, all right, I'll take Jacoby Myers. I'll give you an extra 3rd, or I'll give you a 2nd, or whatever. Like, that stuff adds up because, yeah, 2nd-round picks are great. Yeah, some early 3rds are great. But you kind of hope that they carve out a role like this where they have, a starting job in an offense. And that's what Jacoby Myers has right now. So I like him, again, wide receiver 60. So it's more of a deeper play. But if you can get Jacoby Myers for the cheap and he's a starter, on an NFL team and one of probably their top target, I'd be more surprised if Jacoby Myers doesn't lead the Patriots in targets this year for the 2nd year. So
yeah, I think with Jacoby Myers, the thing that you take into account is that his value is not going to move much from year to year because he's never going to be one of those guys that balls out. He's going to be there to be a floor guy for your team. He's the guy that you put on your team if you need 11 points to win. You're putting in Jacoby Myers over other maybe higher ceiling guys because he's going to get the targets. Mac Jones is going to hit him 6 or 7 times. The only question is, do those go for like 40 yards and no touchdowns, or does he get a little touchdown out of it In the past, I probably would have said no, but look, we saw some new stuff from him last year. He looked a little peppier. I think his game is expanding for him. So I do think we keep seeing him used more and more. He can do so much. Converted quarterback. They've given him running routes before. So he does a lot for this team, and he's got really reliable hands. So for me, Myers is easy because he's somebody you'll always be able to play. So I'm happy to toss out a third for him always because he's a guy that'll improve my team. He'll make my team safer.
He had 5 games last year with +8 targets. He had plus 12 targets twice. I mean, that's Jacoby Myers. We're talking about getting 14 targets, 12 targets. Those are things that, they don't necessarily jump off the page. And again, he doesn't score touchdowns. So that's part of the issue. But as anybody, who plays enough fantasy knows, touchdowns aren't the sticky stat that you're trying to latch onto. If Jacoby Myers adds on, 3-4 more touchdowns, which only gives him a total of 6. It's not like he scores a bunch of touchdowns. That's a game changer for you. That makes some of those weeks from 9 points up to, like the 16 points, 17 points, which is a great number for a guy like Jacoby Myers, who you're probably plugging in to replace somebody else anyway. So
absolutely. Yeah, I think Myers is easy. He's definitely a buy if you're looking for consistency for your team. You don't have that guy, that end of the roster, the guy that can fill in for you on a weekly basis whenever you need him, buys, injuries, that kind of thing. That's what Myers is good for. Look, I don't know if any Patriots receiver is going to have ceilings with Mac Jones because he doesn't throw down the field. He's a very accurate short to intermediate thrower guy. That's why guys like Kendrick Bourne, were mostly deep threats before, middle of the field, deep crossers, seams routes, that kind of thing. That's what they started. There was a tweet that our buddy Luke Sawhook put out the other day about the Patriots wide receiving core, and he drew the ire of Pats fans because he said there weren't any stars in the receiving room. Well, there's not. But what they have is a stable of solid options who can give you fantasy relevance in any given week. I prioritized guys like Kendrick Bourne last year because I know those guys will give me safety.
Well,
so that's important there.
And I think they could have drafted different players. I mean, I had Kendrick Bourne in that 20-team dynasty that we were in. He became very useful throughout the season. He was
very good
wide receiver 3. But I think another point would be in the second round, I think we were all waiting for the Patriots to take one of those wide receivers. Sky Moore was there. George Pickens was there. They took Tyquan Thornton, which kind of blew all of our minds. And who knows how that's going to work. But I think a benefit to that is he doesn't do anything that Jacoby Myers does. They're like completely different players. So if Tyquan Thornton wants to take the Nelson Aguilar role and work on the outside and stretch the field, by all means, go ahead and do it and leave more space for Jacoby Myers to just, ball out. Let him play quarterback a little bit. Who cares?
It's going to be interesting to see how everyone fits in there because you got Devontae Parker now there as well. Aguilar's still there. Kendrick Bourne and Jacoby, and now Thornton. So that's 5 receivers for a 3-man set. So that'll be interesting to see if that affects, Jacoby's thing at all. But I think he's got that slot role pretty locked down at this point.
Who's your next guy?
My next guy is Mike Williams. And for anyone that knows me, this is a big thing for me. I perennially think Mike Williams is undervalued. And true to nature, he's here. Wide receiver 34, making no sense, just got signed to a $20 million a year deal. Look, him and Keenan Allen both signed through 2024. Big thing for this Chargers team that throws the ball a ton. Look, we're talking about a pre-show a little bit, how we view the Chargers offense and the Cincinnati offense pretty similarly here. It's pretty common. It's starting to become pretty common to see people rank T. Higgins as, a top 10, top 8 guy, even in redraft, definitely in Dynasty, but, he's getting up there in redraft too. Look, Joe Burrow is going to probably throw the ball close to 700 times this season because he has to. The Chargers are going to be pretty similar in that vein as well. Eckler and Spiller are going to switch off, but again, neither is a heavy carry kind of guy. This is an offense that thrives through throwing the ball, and to keep up with the Chiefs, the Broncos, and the Raiders in that loaded AFC West, they're going to have to a lot. So, I mean, Mike Williams is a guy who saw 130 targets last year. It was a breakout year. You know, he hadn't seen any season that was over 90 targets before. And he put up a sick year. And really his first crazy season since 2019 when he put up 49 receptions for just over 1,000 yards, averaged 20 yards a catch. But he only had 2 touchdowns that season. The difference this season, he had 9 touchdowns. So he put up 76 receptions, 1,146 yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns. It was a qualified breakout season for a guy that we have really been waiting to see something crazy from ever since he was drafted at 7th overall 5 years ago. And we haven't really seen it. You know, Keenan Allen has always been the guy, the reliable guy. Like we said, he rolls out of bed, catches 100 passes. It's easy as that these days for Keenan Allen. But Mike Williams has always been there as kind of like the big downfield guy. Can't have any yak, just falls down as soon as he makes the catch.
Falls down ungracefully whenever he makes the catch.
Yes, and risks major injury by making that. But last year was different. His usage shifted in 2021, and it had to be, the new offensive scheme coming in. And Brandon Staley said, let's change things up a little bit. His ADOT went down from what it was at 15 before to 12, and 88 of his 112 targets were less than 14 yards downfield. Mike Williams was used kind of as a chain mover last season, and he's never really been used in that role before. But it worked for him. It allowed him to get downfield a ton more and work as their true downfield option. And, this is the guy who ranked 12th in the NFL in deep targets. He had 25, and he also had 23 red zone targets, which ranked 8. So this is a guy who has a ton of downfield specialty, a bunch of potential, and he's everything that the Chargers have done have looked to him to lead this team. Keenan Allen is 30. He's starting to wind down. We saw him, he's still as reliable as ever with the hands, but he's not the downfield receiver that he once was. And I think we see his role start to slip a little bit. And we see Mike Williams really start to become the face of this passing offense. Like we said, they're going to throw it a ton. It wouldn't be out of line to see Mike Williams not only repeat his 129 targets from last year, but outpace it, because he only had a 23 or 20.8 target share last year. I think that goes up this year, and he gets into that 23-24%. Jared Cook is gone. Gerald Everett replaces him. I think that's a little bit of a step down receiving wise. Mike Williams, he ran 542 routes last year. That ranked 10th in the NFL. I mean, he's going to play a ton. He should be out there every snap and really be putting up numbers. And I really think that he is going to be the guy going forward. It'll be interesting to see what they do in the passing game next year. I think we all expect them to draft a wide receiver this year. We didn't see them do it, but we could see them draft a wide receiver next year. So that'll be interesting to see. But I think there's a better chance that a wide receiver is drafted to replace an outgoing Keenan Allen than it is that someone who would do the Mike Williams role, as he is that guy. 6'4", 220, alpha build. Give it to me all day. I think he's a comfortable top 15 wide receiver this year, and honestly should be regarded that way for the next few years at least.
Yeah, isn't it almost funny how it might be the Chargers uniform, or I don't know what it is, but for some reason Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are like deceptively labeled injury prone when like neither of them are. They both got
lacerated kidney and everything goes down.
They both got hurt in their first year, and ever since then they've been labeled injury prone while not really missing any time, which is crazy. I mean, Mike Williams played 10 years in 2017. But after that, he's only missed 2 games in the past 4 years, which is like kind of crazy. And I think it is because of how he falls and, maybe gets up a little limping, gingerly is the right word for me. But realistically, he's only missed 2 games in 4 years. And to be honest with you, I'm a little surprised that he's down there at wide receiver 34 in ECR, especially because this is, it's ECR. This is where people are ranking him, not even necessarily where they're drafting him. And, 27, I get it. He's getting a little bit older after being, a top 10 pick. It kind of feels like it went by quickly with him, which, I know I say all the time, but maybe I don't know what's happening with my life. It seems like some of these guys' careers are just flying by too quick. But I'm almost surprised that him and Keenan Allen aren't a little closer. I mean, Keenan Allen, 27, Mike Williams, 34, which, like I said, Keenan Allen's like the model of consistency. So it's tough to say anything bad about Keenan Allen, and I won't do it. I refuse to. But Mike Williams should be right there with him, if not above him. I mean, he's 3 years younger than him in the same offense. It's not like he doesn't have the pedigree. It's not like he doesn't have the production based on last year. So, I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown is a spot ahead of him. And I hope Amon-Ra keeps it up. I think he has an opportunity to. But, I mean, Mike Williams kind of trumps Amon-Ra in about every category, I would say. Aside from Amon-Ra having that breakout at the end of the season, I would say there's a lot more uncertainty about Amon-Ra. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is ranked ahead of Mike Williams. I'm a huge DeAndre Hopkins fan. For a long period, he was my favorite wide receiver in the NFL. I love DeAndre Hopkins. Would I bet on him right now over Mike Williams? He's 3 years older, kind of, I'll say gingerly. DeAndre Hopkins has been kind of gingerly getting through the season all last season. We'll see kind of how that happens, going into 2022, but he's going to, already miss 6 games. So I think Mike Williams is undervalued, and I think that's a fair one to say, a fair buy. I know I've kind of seen some different things in the dynasty realm. I've tried to, trade for Mike Williams and thought it was going to be cheaper than it was, and the person who has him is like, sends back something crazy to me that's just, overvaluing. So it is tough to find it with him. But yeah, you have guys ahead of him. I mean, Amari Cooper is ranked wide receiver 26. Mike Williams is 34. I think Amari Cooper's got a good avenue to producing again, with Deshaun Watson. But I don't know, is there a reason the Cowboys maybe just let him go for like a 5th to 6th round swap? I mean, the Chargers just like dedicated a significant portion of money to Mike Williams' future for the next, 3 years or 4-year contract. So yeah, I think Mike Williams is undervalued. And I mean, this is almost going to become a Chargers show because my next guy and then, the next tight end too. But it's all the same reason, it's Justin Herbert. He's great, and he's going to make all these guys better around him. So I think Mike Williams is a good call.
Yep.
And my next guy, almost insurance potentially for Mike Williams. And like I said, he hasn't missed any time. Only missed 2 games in 4 years. And I'm about to say Joshua Palmer. So Joshua Palmer has his own standalone value, I think. But in the case of any injury to Keenan Allen or Mike Williams, Josh Palmer is going as the wide receiver 75. So as you'll catch on, if anybody's listening to this, more of a theme is these aren't, Sam's going a little earlier, I'm going a little later. These aren't my guys that I'm saying build your team around, but he's going as wide receiver 75. So at a certain point, you're just looking for guys with upside at that point. And to end the season, Josh Palmer had a couple, inspiring games, at 17 points, 15 points, 14 points, all from week 14 on. Getting, 7 targets, 6 targets, 9 targets, and doing a lot with them. I mean, all 3 of those games, he scored touchdowns. And again, in a just good offense, Justin Herbert, the downside is that Josh Palmer will, at the very most, be the 4th target if everybody's healthy, because Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, and Josh Palmer. Being the 4th target, though, wide receiver 75, and with the upside of an injury happens to any of those guys, is significant. To Sam's point, we kind of thought the Chargers were going to draft a wide receiver this year, but the Josh Palmer roller coaster has been pretty interesting throughout the offseason, because if you ended the season, like I just listed off, Josh Palmer had some decent games, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, well, Mike Williams needs a new contract. Keenan Allen's 30 years old. They just drafted Palmer, who there was a lot of actually good buzz about throughout the season. I mean, he's 6'1", 210, good size. They spent, I believe it was a 3rd round pick off the top of my head, 3rd or 4th round pick. But it was kind of a roller coaster of, okay, well, you should go buy Josh Palmer because who knows what's going to happen with Mike Williams. And then it was, okay, Mike Williams got his contract, but the Chargers are probably still going to draft another receiver and bury Josh Palmer. But they didn't. So, I mean, they brought back Mike Williams, being the 3rd wide receiver, 4th target. And the Los Angeles Chargers offense isn't a bad place to be. And especially when you can get Palmer for as cheap as you can. I mean, if he's able to, make an impression and produce enough to convince the Chargers that, when Keenan Allen moves on, you're going to have all this money locked up in Mike Williams. If Josh Palmer develops enough to kind of get that wide receiver 2 spot, it's going to be a huge payoff. I mean, with how Justin Herbert's developed thus far and how long we expect Justin Herbert to be productive in the NFL at the age that he is. So again, it's a flyer type pick. I think you can get Josh Palmer for pretty cheap. You might even still find some dynasty managers that are still in the mindset of, Josh Palmer's buried in a sense, like, oh, because that's what you thought all offseason. And people that kind of like come back to their rosters, maybe they see a trade of, oh, here's a 3rd round pick for Josh Palmer. Like, I might be willing to do that. Personally, I would look at that if I was the manager at Josh Palmer, and I would think, why would I do that? At this point, he might have the most upside that he's had thus far. I think he has kind of surpassed the other guys on the roster, and I think he's the wide receiver 3. So I think he's a good buy and a good cheap buy at the price you can get him for. So to not make it too much of a Charger show, there's your second Charger. And in case Keenan Allen or Mike Williams gets hurt, you got Josh Palmer. Josh Palmer is also one of those funny examples, and I like to always slip in these fun narratives here. If he had a different name, if it was something a little more fun that popped a little more than Joshua Palmer, I think people would be buying it a little bit more. But he's got a little bit of the name syndrome where it's just kind of a boring, like, yeah, we've seen it before. Like, it doesn't pop out at you.
You think he's like Mitch Trubisky and wants to be called Mitchell, or he wants
Joshua.
to be called Joshua and
or Kenneth
Palmer?
Kenneth Walker's going through a little bit of that right now. I want to be Kenneth, and everyone's trying to like make him Kenny. He said he'll do Ken. So I guess finding a little bit of middle ground in between. Yeah, he might be. I mean, I love when you see the sleeper names pop up.
So
a little different.
Speaking of that, leads me into the perfect segue for my last wide receiver. You think people call Gabriel Davis Gabe Davis to his face, or is he Gabriel to people?
I think he's Gabe. I think Gabe works. I feel like you have to let Gabe play if you're a Gabriel.
Yeah. But I look at Gabe Davis, and I really hope that he likes to be called Gabe, because that's the way I view him, and I think that's just perfect for how I feel about him. I feel that Gabe Davis is the guy in Buffalo this upcoming season, and not in the sense that he's going to replace Stephon Diggs. Obviously, I'm not that stupid. He just signed a $21 million 4-year contract. But Gabe Davis going off the board as wide receiver 41 in Dynasty, I think that's a little bit too low for a guy that should be the wide receiver 2 on this offense this season. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people, recency bias, coming off the divisional playoff loss to the Chiefs. Gabe Davis put up 8 of 10 targets, 201 yards, 4 touchdowns. I mean, the guy was literally making people break their ankles in coverage. Remember the guy that he like shook out of his shoes and the guy was like sprawled on the field?
Gabe Davis had that was
game of his life. So here's the crazy thing though. I mean, Cole Beasley gone. Emmanuel Sanders gone. Dawson Knox is there. Jamison Crowder is there. Isaiah McKenzie's there, and Stephon Diggs is there. But this is still an offense where they're going to throw a ton. This is an offense that does not prioritize the running back a lot. Josh Allen threw the ball 646 times last season. At an 18% projected target share for Gabe Davis, that would have been 116 targets. He only saw, it bears in mind that he only saw 65 targets last year. He's only seen 63 in both seasons. He's had 63 targets and 62 targets in 21 and 20. Both of those he's had 35 receptions and has put up 549 and 599 receiving yards. But he's got 13 touchdowns across those 2 seasons. That's output that's more in line with double those yardage numbers and double those reception numbers. So, this is a guy that makes the most out of his targets. And he's got a really deep ADOT. His ADOT last year was 13.4, ranked 8th in the NFL, which is, big in itself. He worked as their downfield receiver. but in the same mold, Emmanuel Sanders worked as their downfield receiver last year. So now that he's gone, I feel that Gabe Davis steps into his vacated role and picks up all of those targets. And he's the other perimeter guy across from Stephon Diggs. You got Isaiah McKenzie and Jamison Crowder playing out of the slot. You got some 4 wide receiver sets there. Khalil Shakir is going to, factor in a little bit as well. But Dawson Knox hasn't taken a ton of work yet. And it's like somehow my mic was unplugged a little bit, but Gabe Davis is going to come in and he's going to be great right off the bat because he's proved time and time again that he maximizes his targets and he deserves a bigger role. So, look, in weeks 1 to 13 last year, he never saw more than 52% of the snaps. But from weeks 14 to 20 and 20 being the divisional game, he saw 84% snap share, and that was without Emmanuel Sanders. So we can expect to see in that vein of 80% snap share per game for him, which would mean a huge increase in work. I'm talking about all of his numbers doubling. His targets could double. His receptions could double. The receiving yards, if they match up, they could double as well. And look, again, it's a lot of projection with Gabe Davis, but on paper, it works out perfectly for him to be the wide receiver 2 in Buffalo this season. And again, Josh Allen loves to throw the ball. Gabe Davis has been great when he was targeted deep. He had 17 red zone targets last year. I think everything is working out for Gabe Davis to kind of not only be that preferred guy in the red zone, he could be the true downfield weapon for one of the most dangerous passing attacks in the NFL.
Yeah, making a play on Gabe Davis could be, interesting. Just not the player comp, but the situation comp of. I mean, wouldn't it have been nice to be a year early on Mike Williams last year and get in on him the year early before he just exploded last season and was a borderline wide receiver 1, and that didn't take anything away from Keenan. Keenan was also very good. They were both good, and I think that Gabe Davis, it's interesting, and I think almost a lot of people, a lot of the general consensus out there, another kind of roller coaster of value where after he had the great playoff game, it was almost like everybody making the dynasty jokes, the typical ones of oh, sell him right now, huge, and it's almost such a joke that it's like, oh well, nobody's gonna overpay because he had the one playoff game, you don't, but are we gonna like discount that he just had the best playoff game in NFL history when the Bills needed him? The Bills didn't discount that. They didn't go and add somebody like we thought they were. They added Khalil Shakir because he was a good value where they got him. But I mean, I think a lot of people who have Gabe Davis on fantasy teams, or are just endorsing Gabe Davis, were a little worried the Bills might prioritize getting another receiver, and then we go through this whole cycle again of okay, how's this role going to turn out? But they didn't. They drafted Khalil Shakir. It was a good value. I don't think he necessarily comes in and replaces Gabe Davis. I think Gabe Davis earned a role. And I think the Bills looked at what he did when they needed him and, thought, why would we go and replace this guy? This guy's an important part of our offense. And I think that just throughout the progression of his career, he's earned it. It's, like a cross sport reference, but it's like, Tyler Hero after, the Heat just lost. Tyler Hero's saying, I've been on the bench for years now. It's been 3 years. Like, I want to be a starter. I think I've earned it. I think that Gabe Davis has also earned it where, yeah, you've had Cole Beasley, you've had Emmanuel Sanders, Jamison Crowder will be there. But on the outside, it's going to be Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs. And Stephon Diggs is really good. So Stephon Diggs is going to get a lot of coverage. And I think Gabe Davis is going to be able to figure out ways to win. So I like him a lot. And I think he is undervalued in Dynasty for sure at, what is he, wide receiver 41.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he is undervalued. At the same time, I think it's tough to make the case what we've seen so far over the guys ahead of him. But it's not that hard to project. And we're all in the game of projecting. And you look at the Bills offense, like you said, all the stats you listed off too. They're one of the best offenses in the NFL. And if you're the second target in that, which contrary to my, Juju take, for instance, Juju's probably not going to be the top target. Who knows if he's going to be the second. The Juju take, because same sort of thing. He's going to have a Travis Kelsey there. Gabe Davis is going to have Stephon Diggs there, but that doesn't mean it's a death sentence. It's not like, oh, he has to be the wide receiver one to be productive in fantasy. And I feel like a lot of the time that's the downside of, when we look at this stuff year round and, a lot of fantasy people do. It's, well, show me the upside. What can he be? He can't be the wide receiver one. They have Stephon Diggs. And it's like, okay. he doesn't have to surpass Stephon Diggs to be valuable in fantasy. You brought up, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. People comfortably rank those two in the top, 10 to 12. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. A lot of these guys who are Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, duos with good offenses, with a good quarterback, it happens. It might not happen so frequently, but it happens. And Gabe Davis is in a funny spot in Dynasty because I do think you can trade for him for probably cheaper than you will be able to a year from now. I just think so, because I think people are almost scared of being the ones who fall into the playoff game narrative. It's like, oh, he had the huge playoff game. I'm not going to bite on that. It's like, okay, well, why don't you look at, they didn't add another receiver in those first couple rounds when you thought they were going to. Why don't you look at their roster right now and what they did in free agency? They didn't go add somebody to replace him. So maybe the playoff game does mean something, Yep. So I'm on board with that for sure. I think, he's accurately ranked because it's tough to just be like, oh, he's better than, a lot of these guys ahead of him, like, the Allen Robinson, Mike Williams, those sort of guys. But the projection's there, and it's not an outlandish, unrealistic thing to project. So
no,
I'm on board.
It's not. For me, it's just I feel he's very accurately ranked in redraft. We've seen him as like the wide receiver 25 there. I think he is on underdog right now. Like, I think that's like right around where he's going to finish this year. Like, I think he'll sneak into that back end wide receiver 2 status. And I just don't think in Dynasty, him being valued as a back end wide receiver 3 is really or actually as a wide receiver 4 is where he should be ranked at all. So
yeah, doesn't that seem like it's backwards? I mean, it's like in redraft he is the wide receiver 25, but then in Dynasty he's the wide receiver 41, yet he's 23 years old. We're not talking about an old player. So it is one of those things. And again, when we talk about Dynasty season trades, this is those times where you can take advantage of things like this that don't make sense to you. But you can be like, this doesn't make sense to me. I'm going to go trade for Gabe Davis like he's the wide receiver 40 when likely he might be the wide receiver 25.
Yep, but let's dive right into our second and final segment here. We talked about the wide receivers. Now let's hop onto the tight ends. I'll go first this time. The tight end 9 right now, and I don't think he should be there. There's really no reason I see him there. It's Dalton Schultz. And look, I mean, the case for Dalton Schultz kind of makes itself here. He's 25 years old. He just was the tight end 3. I mean, you have to argue that he can't go any really higher than that, yet he's going off the board as tight end 9, and he's going behind guys who I don't think will have, the same statistical type as the seasons that he will. Look, everyone can argue about a guy like George Kittle, but would you rather have George Kittle, who's in a run-heavy offense, has some injury issues here and there, and has a completely unproven quarterback in Trey Lance? Or would you rather have Dalton Schultz, who in Dallas is the clear-cut wide receiver or the second receiving option right now? Amari Cooper's gone. It's just CeeDee Lamb. Dallas is in a very friendly division against tight ends. And we know that Dallas is going to throw the ball a ton. They were ranked, well above the average of neutral run pass. They were almost a 60% pass team last year. Now that Ezekiel Elliott continues to downtrend, I would rather have Dalton Schultz in that scenario. Look, without Amari Cooper and Cedric Wilson, 25% of the targets from last year are vacated. That's a huge number for Dalton Schultz to step into as basically that second guy there. We're not going to see Michael Gallup until probably midseason. He tore his ACL on January 2nd, I believe. And then, look, he's going to be out he might be out well into the regular season. He's probably going to start the season on the PUP list. We might not see him until, mid-October or November, depending on how his recovery and rehab is going. So I'm just not going to go too far into saying that I think people are a little bit underrating Dalton Schultz because they seem to underrate him all last year. There were plenty of leagues where Dalton Schultz was still on your waiver wire at midseason. And he's a guy who actually was getting consistent work as the tight end one for that Dallas Cowboys team. So for me, it kind of makes sense. They tagged him to avoid free agency. He saw 104 targets last year. He saw 15. He had 15 red zone receptions. So everything kind of points up for me. He's not going to be a guy that wows you athletically. He doesn't have the most, glimmering prospect profile. He is a guy who has good hands. He's very efficient with his targets. He scores. He's a guy who Dak Prescott has a ton of trust in. He had almost 800 air yards last season. I mean, so he's a guy who ranks in all the good metrics. He's a good route runner. He's very good after the catch, and he has good hands. So for me, Dalton Schultz being, tight end 9 is a little bit low for me. I think he could easily move up into that 5 or 6 rating after the season.
Yeah, I could see that too. I personally think he's in Dynasty. I think he's, around fairly priced because, it's the only guys in front of him. It's, Pitts, Andrews, Kelsey, Kittle, Waller, Hawkinson, Goddard, and Freiermuth, who I think all, it makes sense. I mean, Dalton Schultz outproduced a Freiermuth. He, probably outproduced Dallas Goddard and TJ Hawkinson. He outproduced most of those guys. We'll see what the long-term value is with him. I genuinely think people last year were late on Dalton Schultz because of it was supposed to be Blake Jarwin. Like everybody thought it was going to be Blake Jarwin.
Yep.
So then when it wasn't, people were kind of skeptical to buy into Dalton Schultz to be like, well, what about when Jarwin comes back? I even heard somebody this offseason say, well, like, what about Jarwin? It's like the Cowboys let him go. Like he's not even on the team anymore. So
Yep.
Dalton Schultz,
I forget who he signed with.
Yeah, I don't remember either, but Dalton Schultz took the job. I mean, there's not a competition anymore. It's clearly his. So I think that there's, a lot to like about that. There's a lot to like about what the Cowboys have done with their offense to, almost not directly, but indirectly, they've cleared up some room for Dalton Schultz. I mean, Amari Cooper gone, Michael Gallup hurt, like you've said, brought in Jalen Tolbert, but he probably is going to be the second target in the Cowboys offense. I mean, behind CeeDee Lamb, I would assume. So, yeah, when you look at all those guys ahead of him, I mean, not all those guys are the second target in their offense.
Mm-hmm.
And the Cowboys offense, it might be a little bit more, potent than some of those offenses ahead of him, some of the tight ends offenses ahead of him. So I think he's fairly priced, but to, back what you said, because I think it's right, is I mean, you could look back at this in a year from now and be like, wow, I can't believe we were taking all these guys ahead of Dalton Schultz, because if he does close to what he did last year and finishes in the top 5 again, I mean, what argument are we going to have to drag him down? So I think it's a good buy. I don't really know what Dalton Schultz is going for in Dynasty, which would be interesting to me because, in the tight end premium leagues, a little bit more for sure. But that's kind of the teardrop. And, even the Fantasy Pro CCR has it as a teardrop because it really is. I mean, after Schultz, you get into a messy group of full projection. We hope this guy, we think this guy, all those sort of things where Dalton Schultz really, boasted a tight end 3, finish. So I think that he belongs there. And I think you're right to say if you're going to buy Dalton Schultz, now is the time because in a year from now, it could be completely different prices based on what he's able to do. So I think Dalton Schultz is a good one there. I am going to go with my guy, David Njoku. It's probably on a lot of people's buys list right now. Tight end 17. I'll keep it short and sweet. because we're getting close to an hour. We're gonna wrap this thing up soon, and we're just talking tight ends, and outside those top 12 tight ends, man, it gets a little messy anyway. I've got David Njoku, another deceptively young player. He's 25 years old, where it feels like he's been in the league forever. He is entering his 6th season now at 25, which is the Juju Smith-Schuster type of guy in terms of where we just feel like he's been around. The difference between Njoku and some of these other tight ends that are ranked ahead of him is Irv Smith, Albert O. Noah Fant to an extent. Noah Fant's had some decent production, but Albert O, Irv Smith, some of these other guys that are kind of in the David Njoku class of player. Njoku's actually done it. I know it's been a while, but he did. In 2018, he had 56 catches, 639 yards, 4 touchdowns in his 2nd season, which is good for about 145 fantasy points. Not great, but again, we're talking about a tight end landscape outside that top 5, outside that top 10, where you're just looking for something. And Njoku does cross a lot of boxes. I mean, he's athletic. He's now the leader on the roster. Get out of here with the Harrison Bryant stuff. Njoku just got paid a 4-year extension for $56 million. And the tough part with him as well is I almost feel like these past couple of years have been a little bit of a waste. In 2019, he was hurt, so he only played 4 games. 2020, he missed a couple games too, only played 13. But from 2020 through 2021, there was a lot of discussion of David Njoku requesting a trade. And, if you're tuned into all this stuff, you hear about all that. It was almost like a foregone conclusion that when Njoku's contract was up, he was gone. I mean, they were going to trade him or let him go. They paid Austin Hooper like one of the highest paid tight end contracts a couple of years ago. They seemed to be doing everything to not have David Njoku work out. Then his contract's up, they franchise him, and then they work out a long-term extension. I mean, they clearly must like what they've seen over these past couple of years, and now he gets an upgrade with Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson's 2022 season, might be in jeopardy. We'll see how many games he actually is suspended, but I mean, I think it's going to be a decent amount. And fortunately for David Njoku, inking a 4-year extension, as Deshaun also inked the biggest contract in NFL history. Now he's not going anywhere, and neither is Deshaun. And I think that bodes pretty well for him. Aside from Amari Cooper, we'll see what happens with David Bell. There's not a ton of targets in the passing offense in Cleveland. So if David Njoku can get nice and cozy with Deshaun, hopefully not too cozy, then I see a good future for him. You didn't even catch that joke, Sam. But, I think David Njoku is a good buy here because I think you can get him on the cheap. And, while people are getting excited about the Alberto, Irv Smiths, who I like too, maybe Evan Ingram, those sort of guys who might have found themselves in new fun situations. Look at David Njoku, who's quietly just been in Cleveland for a long time doing nothing, and now he gets a couple upgrades, contract, quarterback, all these sort of things that make you maybe buy back in. So I get David Njoku on the cheap. I'm happy to have him on the couple of dynasty teams that I do have him on.
Yeah, I'd take him now before this suspension news for Watson comes out, because once Watson comes back from that suspension, the price is only going to rise because they've shown that they want to get Njoku more involved in this offense. They said it last year too, and they said that there would be some changes to the passing scheme with Watson there. So I definitely think that we can see Njoku become a major focal point of this team. I'm going to move on to my last guy here in the man, and it's been someone who's I've seen his name. He keeps getting tossed around Twitter. And look, the consensus is this. The Bears are going to be really, really bad. But, man, if Cole Kmet can't have a good year despite that. Look, the Bears wide receiving room. Look, our friend Justin Wright, our former boss at 14 Personnel, had one of the funniest tweets I've seen when he tweeted out the Bears wide receiver core, or the U.S. prison system has a better wide receiving core than the Chicago Bears do right now. And that was tweeted the morning that Jerry Jeudy was arrested.
It was in bad taste.
Yeah, it was definitely in bad taste, but it cracked me up because really just how true it is. The Bears do not have a good wide receiving core. And all the respect to Darnell Mooney. That man is a dog. He is so good, but he cannot do it all by himself. Luckily, he's got his buddy Cole Kmet, second-round pick out of Notre Dame, to help him out. And look, Cole Kmet had a very weird 2021 season. We all thought that he was going to go in and have some star turn, but I mean, he put up the numbers. He put up 93 targets. He had 60 catches. 612 receiving yards isn't the greatest. Here's the problem. Goose egg for the touchdown category. Not good. I mean, this is a guy who was pretty used heavily in the offense. He had 9 deep targets. That ranked 6th among NFL tight ends last season. I mean, that's like he was a guy that was used in deeper routes across the field, and he just couldn't manage to stumble his way into the end zone. And part of that was some Justin Fields growing pains, and those are there, and they still have them, and they're probably still going to be there this year. But if Cole Kmet had just caught 4 or 5 touchdown passes, his rest of his production profile would have put him in the top 5 tight ends for last year statistically. So I look for a huge improvement for Cole Kmet. He's ranked as the tight end 13 right now, and he's going to be great this year. And once the Bears fill out this offense, he's going to be great going forward. I mean, the Bears aren't going to be very good for a couple of years. They're going to have to throw a ton, and someone has to be the red zone guy for this team. Kmet had 12 red zone targets last year and 0 touchdowns. Again, like I said, Jesper Horsted, Jimmy Graham, Jesse James, they're all gone. These are the guys that caught 6 touchdown passes on 34 combined targets. Remember Jesper Horsted caught like 3 touchdowns on like 4 targets? They were all red zone. Like, that's ridiculous. So once Fields really got going last year, Kmet was averaging, 7 targets and 50 yards a game. I mean, if he's able to do that this season, the sky's the limit for him. So I'm really high on what Cole Kmet can do. I definitely think he deserves to be ranked higher than tight end 13. I think he should be ranked higher than Noah Fant. I think he should be ranked higher than Mike Gesicki. So I definitely think he makes his way up there. And yeah, he's not a star yet, but he's going to get every chance to be this year to be a fantasy star.
Yeah, and I mean, Kmet finds himself in an interesting situation that, a lot of these top tight ends found themselves in at one point. The Mark Andrews, Travis Kelsey, George Kittle, TJ Hawkinson to an extent where, I mean, it didn't just happen because they're good players, because they are good players, but it was also a lack of talent around them where they kind of become the top receiving option in an offense. And I mean, like we said with the Bears, Darnell Mooney's great. Darnell Mooney's a great player for what he does, but I mean, he's not going to get everything. He's definitely not going to get all of it in the red zone. He's like 175 pounds. So Darnell Mooney's very good, but the Bears have not done much to add around him. And if Cole Kmet can develop, the sort of chemistry with Justin Fields that, maybe Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson had, or, Kittle and Garoppolo for a little bit. I mean, Travis and Kelsey and Mahomes. I mean, where you can really be that top option in the offense, which Kmet really has a wide open door to. I think he really does have the ability to jump up into that top tier. I don't really see, what the huge difference would be between him and a TJ Hawkinson, finding themselves a little bit closer together after this year. They'll be similar age. They're both in, kind of suspect offenses having to prove themselves. So I think Kmet can take a big jump next year as well. And my last tight end, I will keep this very short and sweet because he's tight end 23 in fantasy pro CCR. So I mean, we're getting to a spot where you could throw me at tight end, and then it might help out just as much as Gerald Everett. But Gerald Everett, tight end 23. Like I said before, we don't mean to make this a Chargers show unintentionally, a Justin Herbert show, I guess. But I mean, you want guys who are attached to him. We made a case for Darnold Parham for the past couple of years, hoping that, maybe he would be the guy. They've continued to, Jared Cook. Now it's Gerald Everett. Find these kind of athletic tight ends. I mean, Jared Cook's an athlete, so is Gerald Everett, able to do a lot of things. And, the same case I made for Josh Palmer potentially being the 4th target in that offense. I mean, Gerald Everett will be the other competition for that, for being the 4th target behind, Keenan, Mike Williams, Eckler, finding a way to just, get targets from a good quarterback. And, those are much more valuable when they're coming from Justin Herbert. So Gerald Everett's, 27 years old still. He's 6'3", 240. Like I said, good athlete. Chargers just brought him in for, I want to say, 2-year deal, $8 million. Or sorry, 2-year deal, guaranteed $8 million. So, it's a significant, signing for a tight end. He's tight end 24. Some guys that are going ahead of him are, Tyler Higbee, Logan Thomas, Evan Ingram again. I think Gerald Everett's right around that sort of class. I don't think he's underrated by any means, but I'd be inspired to have him on my team, or if you can get him for the real cheap, if you need a tight end, who's to say he doesn't do better than, Noah Fant, who's ranked, 12 spots ahead of him. So I think that the quarterback's going to make a huge difference. Getting with Justin Herbert should be big time. So he's more of a late buy. You can get him for pretty much nothing. So why not? Why not take a shot on Gerald Everett?
Yeah, he'll be a guy I look to plug in a lot of tight end when I, if there's a rough start on the schedule, injury, bye, that kind of thing. I'll definitely look for that. I was a big Gerald Everett guy last year. Didn't work out so well in my favor. Had to reassess a little bit. But
reset. He is now with Justin Herbert. Reset
exactly.
Reset everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Gotta reset there. Russell Wilson, not a huge user of the tight end in his offense. Makes you wonder about Alberto. Just think about it.
It does. Yes, it does.
But Justin Herbert, definitely a solid user of the tight end. We saw that from the Jared Cook usage. So hopefully that'll work out there. But that is all the time that we have tonight. Thank you guys for staying for a great show. As always, please go check out the YouTube, High Floor Football on YouTube. Would love to catch some more subs there. Always nice to help us out by hitting the subscribe button, liking the video, hitting the bell so you can see when we go live. The audio will be out tomorrow as it is every week. And we will see you guys again next week. Same time, same place. See you guys on the flip side.
Adios.